Hello, and welcome to the Walrus Talks at Home, Public Education and Philanthropy, presented by Taking It Global. I'm Jennifer Hollett. I am the Executive Director of the Walrus. I'm also your host and moderator this evening. We're excited to be joining you live and online, bringing people together across country and beyond in conversation. I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm on in downtown Toronto, Ontario, Toronto. A land acknowledgement helps us recognize history, thinking about how it informs where we are now and what changes can be made going forward in a commitment to reconciliation. Our offices and where I am in Toronto are located within the bounds of Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit. This land is also the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, Toronto is home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We are honored here at the Walrus to contribute to a tradition of storytelling, and we welcome you to reflect on the land you're on wherever you're joining us from today. And as part of the ongoing work of reconciliation, if you haven't done so already or even recently, we encourage you to read the 94 calls to action recommended by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The Walrus is Canada's conversation. We cover stories across Canada to offer a deeper understanding of who we are for those inside and outside the country. And this year, from tariffs to taunts of becoming the 51st state, Canada is the conversation, and the country is standing strong. We are responding to this moment with facts, analysis, and sometimes even humor. You can find us online at thewalrus.ca. We're also available in print on newsstands or by subscribing to the Walrus. You can listen to our podcasts and audio stories and take part in events like this one. This work is independent and is powered by our community of donors, supporters, and partners. A big thank you to our longstanding partner, Taking It Global, for supporting this work. Tonight's event is taking a look at education. Public education is in a tough spot. Funding dollars are always tight, and provinces like Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Newfoundland and Labrador haven't been keeping up with inflation and are spending less per student. Some school districts have a backlog of repairs to school buildings that number in the tens of thousands. Extracurricular and enrichment activities, accepted as an important part of a well-rounded education, are hard to come by, especially in the north. Considering some of the funding gaps for infrastructure, let alone education, how do we expect our school trustees, teachers, and administrators to provide Canada's next generations of young people with a well-rounded education? One of the answers may surprise you: fundraising. Parents who want to contribute to their child's public education are often tasked with fundraising. The dollars earned are put towards field trips, upgrades to sporting facilities or equipment, even to buy sports uniforms. Fundraising also plays a role when sourcing and paying for enrichment activities. That could be bringing in speakers or specialized educators who run programs on things like how to write code, school gardening projects. By the way, that sounds really cool, or a robotics club. But fundraising, it's largely dependent on the ability of parents to engage. And depending on your neighborhood, parents living in lower socioeconomic circumstances, or in the north or in rural and remote areas, may have less time and less money to contribute, which means those schools have fewer resources and those students have fewer opportunities to learn and engage. And this is where philanthropy plays a part, and we'll be hearing more about that in tonight's talks. With the Walrus Talks at Home, each speaker will present their talk one after the other live, and this is followed by a moderated Q&A with our talkers and you, our audience at home. So we encourage you to submit any questions you have at any point in the comments section. And when you post your question, we want to know where you're joining us from. We also encourage you to share this conversation on social media. So feel free to post a pic of how you're watching us or even some of the takeaways. You can tag us at The Walrus and use our hashtag Walrus Talks on any of the social platforms. Tonight, we'll be hearing from live Dr. Jan Hare, Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia and a Tier 1 Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Pedagogy. Erin Kothetty, Director of First Nations School Board in the Yukon. Maika Harper, actor, you probably recognize her, author, and a content provider for Connected North, as well as Mark Blumberg, lawyer, Blumbergs Professional Corporation. A big thank you to all of our talkers for joining us. And we're going to start things tonight with Dr. Jan Hare. Welcome, Jan. I'm going to send it over to you.
Wonderful. So, Ani Bojo, my name is Jan Hare, and I'm really pleased to be part of this conversation with the Walrus. And I'm joining you today from the Musqueam and Squamish territories. And I'm really wanting to take a moment to speak about teachers and their significant role in the lives of young people, and as well as perhaps what's happening in the current teacher workforce, some of the changes that we're seeing. So we know that teachers play a significant role in the lives of children and youth, and we can all likely reflect on a teacher that influenced us in positive ways, and I'm going to say maybe even in negative ways. And I'm sure those in the audience can cite a teacher, maybe even two or three, who may have had a profound influence on the trajectory of their lives. I'm going to say for me, it was Mrs. Imbalati in grade 2, who just really instilled for me just a love of learning. And I'm also going to add Roy Keach, who was my grade 10 teacher at Chippewa Secondary in grade 10, who during English class and at the end of English class would read to us this novel, To Kill a Mockingbird. And I'm going to say, as an Indigenous person, I really got to see the multiple ways that racism operates in societies, both historically and contemporary. It gave me it really impressed upon me social justice and what that meant. And just to add, I did end up naming my son Atticus, so after the main character. Teachers become, I'm going to say, really enmeshed in student lives, whether as mentors, providing inspiration, encouraging lifelong learning, supporting the development of young people. And I really think about it. It's an intensely relational profession, that they have the ability, teachers have the potential to build high quality educator-learner relationships that form the basis for learning about the world and preparing young people for their place in it. And so I also think that, or equally important, teachers contribute to the community and the culture of schools. And so as a result, they contribute to the social, cultural, economic well-being of our society, creating inclusive and equitable quality education. And I will add that teaching, the teaching profession has long attracted talented people passionate about education. And so, for some of the reasons that I just described, recruiting and retaining teachers holds more significance now than maybe some other professions. And yet, what we are seeing is an unprecedented number or unprecedented teacher turnover across this country. And I really think that we should be concerned because it impacts on the stability and quality of education, as well as a consistent experience for students. So we need to be concerned about what we're seeing in terms of a teacher shortage that is happening. And I'm going to use BC, British Columbia, as an example. And of course, in other places, similarly, we see natural attrition through retirements, of course. But what we are seeing here in British Columbia is that younger educators and educators who have been perhaps in the profession for 5 years or less are actually leaving the profession. And this is because their roles and also their working conditions have certainly become more complex. We see increased demands on teachers, whether that's through class composition challenges, that is the size or the makeup of a classroom, shifting resources, which impact on perhaps cuts to administrative time or preparation time for teachers, resources in the classroom, starting salaries, even behavioral concerns and student needs, parental expectations, and the lack of substitute teachers. So we're seeing teachers who need to cover for their absent colleagues. And so when we think about the demands of the workplace, these are demands that are really having a negative impact on the mental health and wellness of educators. And we also can all reflect on COVID. I know sometimes we look back and think, wow, that time was a blur. But COVID really had wide ranging and long lasting impacts on education. Research on teacher well being during the pandemic really confirms the heightened levels of stress and emotional exhaustion among teachers. And I'm going to say many teachers were then hesitant to return to the classroom following COVID. And certainly we have others who perhaps wanted more flexibility in the return. So teachers are then also addressing learning gaps that resulted from from the time of COVID. And we see this teacher shortage compounded in areas of, I'm going to say, rural remote education, Indigenous communities, and areas of specialty in teaching, French education, special education. These are areas that are being impacted. As a dean and a faculty of education, we even see declining enrollments in teacher education. So really bringing and recruiting folks into the profession. And so thinking about parents as a result, parents may see substitute teachers filling roles in classrooms. Or even unqualified teachers holding positions in classrooms. And and so this really does impact on students, whether it's the relationships that they build with educators in teaching and learning. The quality of learning becomes impacted as we see inconsistency perhaps in the classroom. And some research, I'm going to say, suggests that consistent teacher shortages impact on student achievement and student outcomes. And so I think that we need immediate and collective actions to address this. And this is all educational partners, including parents. And so, what is it that we need to be doing? What are actions that we need to be taking? We need to make educators and administrators feel valued. And this is where I think parents can build relationships with educators that are based on respect, curiosity, help support the challenges that may come with learners, as well as the opportunities and the gifts, I'm going to say, that learners then bring to the classroom. So really seeing parents seeing themselves as partners in education of their child or their young adolescent. Also, I think we need to adequately, and this was mentioned in our introduction to our topic today, but adequately resourcing the profession. We need to think about wages, classroom size, supports for teachers. I do also think it's important that we start to think about how do we recast the profession? How do we help others see it as it's a collaborative profession so that we can attract and retain through creating desirable and rewarding workplaces, whether that is through providing compensation or incentives to educators, as well as diversifying the workforce. We really need to support educators for growth and development. And so that is providing professional development and mentorship. And I'm really excited that I'll just give an example here in the province of British Columbia, the Ministry of Education and Childcare and the Ministry of Post-Secondary and Future Skills is funding a 3-year mentorship initiative where the Faculty of Education at UBC will host an office or host the Office of Provincial Teacher Mentorship for the province of British Columbia. As well as I think we need to be, certainly as faculties of education, we need to be offering flexible and accessible pathways to education careers. So whether that's micro credentials, pathways for international educators, and flexible programs. And so just to say that I think all of us as educational partners have a role to play. So, Miigwech, thank you.
Yuck. Hey, it's a teeny. Kothetty Uchattuasok. My name is Kothetty. It's so good to see you. I'm talking to you from the beautiful Liard First Nations traditional territory here in Watson Lake, Yukon, where the First Nation School Board is hosting a REM, a Rural Experiential Model. I have the privilege and honor of being the director of the First Nation School Board and to share a little bit about our story. The school board is newly established and a nonprofit organization serving 11 of the most rural and remote communities in the territory. We manage and operate public schools, and we're firmly rooted in Yukon First Nations worldviews. The First Nation School Board was established as a calls to action after a second scathing Auditor General's report in 2019, where the Yukon government was found to make no progress on meeting the needs of Indigenous and rural students, as well as like the great majority of other learners. And so at this very hard time, the Chiefs Committee on Education was reinstated, and it is made up of 14 Yukon First Nations, and they came together to see what could be done right away, not another generation that this is happening to. And so I have to say that the local wisdom on how to educate our children best has always existed within our people and within our communities. In Yukon, the majority of our nations are self-governing modern treaties, and so we don't have reserves in the Yukon, and we do have the legal ability to like draw down governing authorities and services, everything from justice to lands to resources and including education. And drawing down takes a really long time. Um, I think people have told me about 10 years or so, and then you'd be fully responsible for education in the building. And so we needed something fast, something that our children that are in school, how can we make a difference? And so the First Nation School Board was established with an existing territorial law. So within the Yukon's Education Act, we're actually legislated by BC. And so we follow BC curriculum. And that's where we get where we got the authority to be able to have the First Nation School Board. So in the very first year, we were proud that 8 of the 24 schools were voted in to join the First Nation School Board, and then a year after, 3 more. So we now have 11 schools that we have the honor and privilege of co-governing. And when I want to talk a little bit about co-governing. So co-governing for us includes equal partnership on school management, all the way from setting calendars, dates, the budget, we know that's important. The hiring of staff, we don't do that without our Yukon First Nations partners from that traditional territory. School growth plans, locally developed curricula, and of course, school culture and any policies or procedures that the community feels need to be changed or tweaked or created within their community. And so this is all done through legal agreements with the nations to establish local bodies called community committees, which are replacing school councils. And so what we're doing is we're putting Yukon First Nations citizens in the driver's seat of their schools. And now we are seeing how different education can look here in the Yukon and how successful our learners can be. I'm really excited to share this example because tomorrow, in one of our most northern communities, Old Crow, on the traditional territory of the Vuntut First Nations, a group of learners are setting off on a 10-day trip. And I was on this trip last year. It was life-changing. Um, so what they're going to do is they're going to skidoo from Old Crow over which is a fly-in only community, and they will cross over the Richardson Mountains by skidoo, following an ancestral trail called the Dagutai. And it's between Old Crow and Fort McPherson, in Northwest Territories. And it's another Gwich'in community, so they would travel back and forth. And so this is the second year that the First Nation School Board has embarked on this culturally meaningful trip that embraces Vuntut Gwich'in ways and their worldview and really emulates and honors holding up land as pedagogy. And so trips like these are important initiatives and help showcase our goal of fully integrating culture within instruction, curriculum, assessment, learning spaces, um, for the schools and students learning in our traditional territories. We no longer want to see Yukon First Nations culture as like a segregated subject, as just like a culture days, which are great. We want to see them fully integrated. And our land tells stories and teaches science. There's numeracy and geometry in our drums. Our worldview circles around our learners, establishing pride, a sense of belonging, confidence integral to growing and developing skills. And it is working. After only 1 year of our literacy plan, our learners' standardized test results are up 14 standard scores. This is the first time in over 30 years Yukon students' scores have increased in literacy. I have another cool example of co-governance. So Nell Nabessi John School in Beaver Creek, one of our smallest and another remote school located on the traditional territory of the White River First Nations, right on the western border of Yukon and Alaska. And so together we're working with the administration and the nation to change their school calendar. And so our school calendars look different. And so this community, um, now their school year is all year round. They have the same amount of instructional time, but they go to school all year round. Their summer break is only like a month, but they go to school for like 4 weeks, get a week off. Go to school for 4 weeks, get a week off. They've also strategically taken time off at their um, and moose harvesting season, as well as their fish harvesting season, as well as like muskrat, which is like a lot of families are enjoying that right now. And so really the calendar is not um enforced on the community. The community is empowered to decide how their school day looks, and they're able to meet those curricular objectives laid out by the government or the instructional time. And so what we've heard from teachers and community member is that their stress levels have gone down, that like that how you kind of lose things. Sometimes teacher talk about that over like a big 3-month summer holidays, that it just feels healthier and people are more connected. And they're not having absences when beautiful hunting and harvesting seasons are happening with the First Nations. And so it's been a really beautiful process in that community, to show how they could solve any kind of calendar issues with their school, like a simple change, but man, was it mind blowing. I'm really excited to share this next one because it's on the traditional territory of the Champagne-Ajac, which I'm a proud member, in the community of Duckwakutta or Haines Junction. So we had 2 educators develop a phenomenal food sovereignty course. We had one fluent speaker and one kind of like Western amazing science teacher, who specializes in those types of courses. And so they're doing things from 2 worldviews in the classroom all the time. And so this was jam-packed experiential curriculum. And some of the amazing programs they did in that half a year was they were able to go on a moose hunt by canoe in the Kluane National Park. They spent time on a local trap line and also got to visit and spend a week at a local farm and see how food is harvested in a farm setting. And so this really combines local, historical, scientific knowledge and an experiential approach to develop a cohesive and connective study of the food system and community health from various worldviews and ways. Um, and so it spans diverse curricular competencies, including economics, transportation, First Nations empowerment, ecological studies, climate change, food security. And so we're really proud to say that most high school students get 4 credits, like, in their semester traditionally. And so these guys were highly academic and were able to get 5 school credits. Um, and then one other thing that we saw when we were talking to the learners and looking at, like, their scores and those types of things is that they were coming to school all the time. In the attendance increased astronomically. And so these are wonderful things to say that our kids are seeing themselves reflected in their learning. The community is seeing them and they're having fun at school. Um, and they're learning. They're learning about the world around them in a really culturally rich and academic way. And so while I'm happy to keep going and talking about the successes we are seeing within this education system that is decolonized and founded within reconciliation, we are pushing up against the edges of the public funding model all the time. And so we are primarily funded through negotiated transfer payment agreement as our other boards, and this is with the Yukon territorial government. Um, Even though some of our biggest successes, like the Dagu Tai and the literacy plan and the food sovereignty, um, although we've done those, we have been lucky, being a board, that we were able to rely on external funding and partnerships to reach the full potential. We wouldn't have been able to do it without that. And so the fact is, government needs an established proof of concept before its institutions will consider integrating this work into their core funding models. If we are hoping to change and decolonize the education system, we cannot wait for the pace of a colonial government to pay for it. We need access. We need to access other funding sources so that we can do this work in a good way, in the way that we know best, and the way that our learners and communities have proven works, before the government will adopt it. And so that is kind of our conundrum and what we're working towards. And we are energized and we are excited and we will fight for these learners and work hard for our communities. And so this is our current path. And this is the future path that we are um, bushwhacking through and cutting the buckbrush. And so I thank you so much for bearing witness to a little bit of our story. And in the words of the traditional territory that I'm on, the Liard First Nation, they say Soga Sinla. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. My name is Maika Harper, and I am an Inuk author, actor, model, and I'm also a content provider. Um, I'm going to be focusing a little on the virtual public education aspects because it's so important to me because that's kind of where I started. And I'm so happy to be able to give back and teach within the public education systems in Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, and Ontario, thanks to Connected North and Taking It Global. I'm originally from Iqaluit Nunavut in the Canadian Arctic, where the education system lacks proper support. I was not being challenged, and I found that the resources were basically non-existent. I yearned for university. I yearned for higher education. I yearned for learning in general. I knew the only way out and the only way to get out of my small town was through education, through school. But anyone coming from the Arctic knows just how hard that can actually be. It can feel daunting. It can feel impossible at times. But I wanted to encourage the youth that you can also pursue higher education. It is possible. It's truly the only way we as Inuit can self-determine our own futures and have what seems impossible in our own communities. Inuit teachers, Inuit doctors, Inuit scientists, Inuit dentists. I mean, the possibilities are really endless. And through public education, I feel like those futures are so bright if we pursue it. I bounced between schools many times as a youth, and not many people know this about me, but I actually graduated high school online. I didn't have a big ceremony. None of my friends were there. I wasn't handed a diploma, and there were definitely no speeches. But I went up against all odds and I forced myself to gain my diploma my own way. I was homeless as a teenager, and conventional daytime school was not an option for me, unfortunately, as much as I really did try. I had to work. I had to work at a really young age, and I had to work to eat. I had to work to live. I had to work. So I worked at Loblaws. And you better believe that I went to night school and I completed online classes to slowly obtain that diploma that I so desperately was needing to survive. It's a little emotional for me, sorry. It was through public education that I was able to do all of that. Like many other Inuit in the Arctic, I was a high school dropout many, many, many times. But through hard work and dedication, I went on to university, which is still quite rare for Inuit even to this day. To go to university is a big feat. And to this day, I am so proud of those online classes that I was able to accomplish to be able to get to where I needed to go. It wasn't easy, but in Canada, I'm really happy for the access to public education, both in person, but more importantly, online. Which is why working with Connected North and Taking It Global is so important to me. Remote learning can be such a beneficial tool for both students and teachers. I myself am a product of those schools that they teach in. I've been those kids. I am the youth. I know what it's like to be in these communities because I've been in them. And I think it's important to influence young people to do and dream big things, to do big things and to lead our own communities because we desperately need nurses and doctors and teachers and scientists. The schools that are part of this online learning are yearning for learning, just like I did when I was a kid. I am so happy to be part of one of the content providers for virtual learning with Connected North because it connects me with students in remote communities like my own that most times don't have the resources that most schools do. It is so important for me to give back to Inuit as much as I can. And through Connected North and Taking It Global, I'm able to work with so many schools across Nunavut, the Northwest Territories, and Northern Ontario. I see and I know firsthand how important it is to access virtual public education and to ignite a fire in students to pursue higher education. One last thought to leave you all with is the fact that living in remote communities, especially in the Canadian Arctic, have a higher cost of living, and most don't account for that exceptional cost. The idea to accrue proper resources for schools to have the same standard as their southern counterparts is exceptional. Internet and computers are needed so desperately. It's not easy, and it won't be an easy venture. But I believe in the youth, and I believe that they are worth it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Maika. My name is Mark Blumberg, and I'm a charity lawyer in Toronto. And so I'm going to talk about this topic of public education and philanthropy. And specifically, there's amazing programs, and Maika just talked about Connected North, which does all sorts of interactive experiences online through video and things with different communities up north. There's a lot of great programs out there, and it'd obviously be good if there was more of it. But the question, I guess, is, some of these programs are focused on the most needy schools. Some are just across the board sort of programs. Some are very innovative programs. Some of them, a lot of the things needed by schools are not that innovative. Like it's nice if, children aren't hungry and things like that, right? So basically, there's a lot of great programs and more that can be done, obviously, and philanthropy can be a part of it. But I guess what I wanted to raise was an issue, and this recently came up in the Toronto Star. They had a big article on the Toronto District School Board, which is the biggest school board that we have in our community here, or the biggest one in Canada, basically. And essentially, the article was about fundraising for schools. And, it's not rocket science to work out that some neighborhoods are much better off than other neighborhoods. So what it means is that you have some schools basically raising a lot more money than others, and it starts to bring in certain inequity. There's already inequity, but it enhances it, unfortunately. So the TDSB had put forward a proposal that maybe if some schools fundraise, then they should, if they're in a better off neighborhood and raise more money, they should give some of those funds over to other schools. And that proposal, which actually our school, the nearby school here, has always been doing, which they raise money and then they give away about like half of it or something to other schools. I didn't think it was that controversial, but it is a very controversial program, and people are saying it's not fair and it's a tax and a tariff and a this and a that. But fundamentally, so I looked at the issue because I thought, what, let's just take this one example, the Toronto District School Board. It happens to be the biggest. I'm not saying it's average, or I'm not saying it's representative, but it is just one example. And with the TDSB, you have about $3.5 billion in revenue per year. And $1.5 billion comes from the province, another $1.6 billion comes from the city of Toronto. And this is to deal with about 245,000 students. So it's a lot of students. Now, if you look at receipted donations, so we're not looking at government money, you look at $1.7 million in receipted donations. Money received from other charities, not even $1 million, it's 636,000. Non-receipted fundraising, that's all the fundraising that parents get involved with, where you're raising money at the school and things like that, fairs and things. That's $32 million. Okay, so in total, the philanthropy, the fundraising, all this sort of stuff is bringing in about $35 million. $35 million out of $3.5 billion. I am not very good at math, so I brought out a calculator, and that's 1% of the revenue. Okay, so just to give you an example, rental of land by the TDSB is about $23 million. Okay, so so the question is, should there be more? Absolutely, there should be more. But I'm first of all not so confident that there's going to be a dramatic rise. I mean, obviously it'd be wonderful if it did happen. But I think that, you look at other institutions, so not K-12, but you look at universities, for example. Well, I'll take the biggest university in Toronto, University of Toronto, 4.3 billion in revenue with 90,000 students. And of course, you can't compare K-12 to universities. They're completely different. But they get 86 million in donations and 82 million from other charities and 20 million from the informal fundraising. So you're looking at about 190 million versus 35 million by the TDSB. So 6 times more money. So I guess my point would be, yes, I'm all for more philanthropic support. There are so many wonderful programs. Some of them are such great value. They achieve so much with so little. But there is no replacement for increased government funding of K-12 and things like that. So we do need more philanthropy, but we need more government funding. And so I think part of the thing that philanthropists needs to think about is, do I just fund charitable activities, excellent programs, or do I also think about how can I fund advocacy around making sure that schools are properly funded? I'm often told that there's cutbacks and all this, and there's no more money in government. I hear this all the time, except we can see that government has money, and it sometimes is increasing the amounts that it's giving to certain priorities and maybe not increasing in other areas. So the point is that there is money there, but how are we going to deal with it? If we spend 10, 20, 30 years and we try to build up like a university style fundraising network like the universities have, who are much more sophisticated at this, maybe we will raise a few more percent, and that's not bad, but it's really not a solution to the huge problems that you have in funding of these school boards and K-12 schools and things like that. So I think the approach of probably funding charitable activities and also funding advocacy to try and increase the amount of money that is brought in, so that in fact there is adequate funding for these schools, because it's a very important age, and very important that people are given that sort of start, and that sort of thing. So thank you very much, and I think it's certainly a wonderful topic to cover.
Thank you so much. All right, we are excited to open this up and get into the conversation. Let us know where you're joining us from today. We have a little poll that has popped up here. Let's see, we have audience members registered from all over the country, including Red Deer. Hello, welcome to Kitchener, Montreal, Winnipeg, Fort Smith, Vancouver, North Battleford, Toronto, Hi to Bridgewater, Lexo First Nation, St. John, and St. John's. We got both here. Excellent. I just want to remind everyone that if you have a question for this Q&A portion of the talks, please just pop it in the Zoom chat and I'll try to get to as many as possible. All right, now I'd like to welcome back our talkers for our question and answer period. Just turn on your video. And I have a few to kick us off, starting with Jan. Jan, I know you're the Dean of Faculty of Education at UBC, and your research examines uh, the process of learning to teach using Indigenous knowledge frameworks. Can you expand on what that looks like for teachers and how it enriches the student experience?
Well, sure, Jennifer. And what a great question to get us started. You say that we might assume that Indigenous education is only for Indigenous students, and I think Erin Pauls really gave some great examples of the benefits of learning from Indigenous ways of knowing, and policies and practices, and and really in the face of challenges. Maika Harper, I really appreciate your story of one of persistence, and wonder if education had been different and inclusive of Indigenous ways of knowing, how your experience might have been different. And you also refer to Connected North and that kind of meaningfulness that creates, and so how you thrive when having these opportunities to learn from Indigenous ways of knowing. But I also want to suggest that the benefits of learning from other ways of knowing and being and seeing in the world, and from Indigenous perspective, has tremendous benefits for all students. Indigenous knowledge frameworks promote equity and inclusion, enhance learning experiences, and I'm going to say, as Erin's example points out, really offer new solutions, I think, to society's most pressing problems. I think there's been really important efforts in this country to recognize the truth of Canada's history, improve Indigenous settler relations in our country, and I think education really plays a role in achieving more respectful and equitable relations. And so Canada's TRC has really been instrumental in that kind of curriculum reform in provinces across this country, to bring Indigenous perspectives, worldviews, histories, and pedagogies to classrooms. So I think helping teachers, I really think we need to begin by learning and unlearning. So unlearning has to consider how our ideas about what teaching and learning looks like has been shaped, or how our professional learning as educators has really been steeped in Eurocentric knowledge and traditions. And then how this knowledge still permeates the curriculum. And so this is really, educators need to begin by questioning for themselves, and perhaps for all of us, our own sense of power and privilege, or even the lack thereof, as it concerns and what counts as knowledge. And I'm going to say this can be really uncomfortable for educators to really confront colonial histories, but we need to challenge colonial structures of schooling and help our young people engage critically uh, in a curriculum, um, if we are to be active participants in reconciliation. So I think turning to learning about Indigenous frameworks and intentionally creating opportunities to learn from Indigenous histories and perspectives and ways of knowing is important across all aspects of our curriculum. Engaging with Indigenous pedagogies, and some were shared here: land-based, land education, intergenerational, experiential learning, storytelling, traditional teaching and knowledges. And then I think I'll just conclude with just community engagement and collaboration. So, in asking educators and school districts and others to really invest time in developing relationships with Indigenous people, whether that's at whether that's school district, Indigenous school district personnel, elders, knowledge keepers, community members, that as part of the educational process. And so really encouraging educators and others to learn from and with Indigenous people. So
Right,
I'm
thank
glad.
you. We have a question for Maika. Maika, thank you for sharing your story. Brent wants to know, do major employers in Canada, such as Loblaws where you work, provide any support for employees, like going back to school, external education and training? From what you know, I'd be curious.
Unfortunately, not at the time when I was going to, when I was going to night school and going online through school that way, that avenue. There weren't very many helpful pillars apart from being able to access school without the conventional daytime structure. Those hours from 9 to 5, those hours that you usually work. And I was given a really unique opportunity, but it's not unique for me, and it's not unique for many Inuit that have gone through this process. There are so many people that have gone through university online, and to be able to access that is the only way really is being able to work. So work for me was working at Loblaws, whether that was Loblaws, Starbucks, wherever it be for anybody else. I found it was really difficult. There are other chains I know of that actually really do help with education. I know Tim Hortons has a really fantastic fund, and they really do help people that are pursuing education, higher education, and high school in general. So it's not just one specific chain. But there's many, many, many chains, and there are some that do help. Yes.
Right, that could be an opportunity for growth. Margaret asks, and Erin, I'm going to direct this to you. She writes, as a former school head, philanthropy, it has always been much harder to fundraise for K to 12. So I wonder how it can become a greater priority. K to 12 is foundational and can influence the future of society. This is true. It comes up in many of the talks that we host. How can this be changed? Erin, I'd be curious in terms of like, how do we communicate at large the importance of K to 12?
Well, K to 12 is so important. I think I'll use the words of Murray Sinclair that education got us into this mess and it will get us out. And so it is critical. And really, it's such an honor and privilege to work in education because we have a privilege of being able to sit with our future generation and be able to, it's impactful. I believe that education is political in nature, really. It is, whether you think it is or not, because we are able to shape the minds of our young people, which should be held to the highest honor. It is so, so important. I think really the Walrus is helping. When I thought about that, like I don't have a lot of time to think about it, but like telling our story, especially as a Yukon First Nations person, telling our story is important, being able to bear witness, because through that you see the struggle, you see the beauty, you see the resilience, you see the strength, and you see the growth. And so that's like um uh, like we're fighting the violence of low expectations on First Nations people. And so when I am able to share the story of the First Nation School Board and how we're defying and changing things that haven't been changed in 30 years in the 3 short years that we've been here, um, and letting people know that it's okay to think outside the box and to do things differently, and we're making data-informed decisions. So, yes, telling our story, but it's backed up with data. It's backed up with facts and stories, and, I always say, like, for like, because I'm a traditional dancer and singer, and I'm like, we had APA and Jan will like this, and MLA, like that's where you have the reference stuff. We had that. We have these structures within our people, the way that we have our oral stories, the way we share our stories, and how we give credit to those who need credit for them, and when we have permission to share things. And so I think sharing our story and people authentically hearing and wanting to be a part of it, and really, Melanie Bennett, one of the great leaders in the Yukon, she says this is we're raising the waters to lift all canoes. So it's public school, it's for all learners. We do have a large Yukon First Nations population, but we're looking after all learners, no matter where they're from. And when they have the privilege of being on the traditional territory of one of the 9 First Nations that we serve in the Yukon, that we're able to partner with them, celebrate each other's culture, and learn from one another.
Well, thank you for that. And I also have to say thank you to all the teachers and educational workers who've tuned in tonight, getting lots of great feedback and questions in chat. This is from Stephanie. It's for you, Mark. Is philanthropy a way to accelerate the development of school infrastructure for sports, which then becomes a strategy for retention and achievement of students? And I will say, as someone who grew up in both Canada and the US, I know there's a big culture around that south of the border.
No, absolutely. Well, I think there are many areas. Different people are attracted to different things. Some people love sports, some people love arts, some people love technology. People love different things, and having them, be available, good resources for everyone, makes a huge difference. So I think yes, it's philanthropy could. The main concern that I have is even if we double the amount of philanthropy, triple it, which again is not an easy thing to do because the area is not prioritized. There are things that are prioritized within philanthropy. You can see, look at where, foundations are giving money and things like that. There are certain areas that get far less funding than other areas. So one can work hard to bring in more money. And if you double it, you'll have another 1%. But if you can put pressure on political leaders to adequately fund, then you'll end up with probably much more. So I'm not saying just focus on the political and ignore the current needs and things like that, but it's some sort of combination of the two, because I'm not optimistic that philanthropy is going to quickly become generous in this area. That's just my perception. And we have so much money being accumulated in foundations. It's now $150 billion is sitting in foundations. Okay. It's many people tell me it's like raining and pouring right now. It's terrible out there. There's all these problems. There's the tariffs. We had COVID just a few years ago, and the foundations are not necessarily budging that much. So a lot of money is going in, but not necessarily coming out. And so hopefully there'll be changes, but that's a process that I'm not as optimistic about. Whereas putting pressure on government to adequately fund, I think is maybe a better approach if possible.
Well, I've heard the word partnership mentioned a few times tonight. I think there are lots of partners who have an opportunity to come on board, from government to parents to community to philanthropists. Wow, we've covered so much. We have reached the end of our Q&A session. A big thank you to our talkers and everyone who's joined us today for this important education conversation. There is also a federal election underway, so it's always a good opportunity to think about the importance of education. Thank you again to our speakers. You've heard from Dr. Jan Hare, Erin Kothetty, Maika Harper, and Mark Blumberg. I'd now like to welcome to the screen Jennifer Corriero, who's the co-founder and executive director of Taking It Global, to say a few words. Hi, how are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Okay, over to you.
Oh, wow. What a great evening. I truly hope that the gathering tonight will help to increase the priority of supporting educational opportunities for students in K-12 education, and also just increasing the appreciation that we have for teachers. Dr. Jan Hare, as you were speaking, I was thinking of my grade 7 teacher. Mr. Coots, in grade 7, he asked if I wanted to be the director of a school play. And that was the first time that I held the title of director. And here I am today as executive director of an organization. And so much of my own motivation is just sharing that confidence and belief in students so that they know what they're capable of, and so that they're surrounded by people who believe in them. Erin, I'm so grateful for our partnership with the Yukon First Nations School Board and the 11 schools that are part of our network. The Connected North serves of 200 schools that are located in northern remote First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities. So thank you for sharing today. Maika, you are such an incredible role model. Connected North facilitates these virtual learning experiences. And Maika, you are so inspiring. I see a teacher in the chat that might want to book you maybe for their classroom. We have over 400 content providers, and over 200 are Indigenous role models. We work with also institutions, educational institutions like science centers and cultural centers So if you're new to Connected North, please reach out if you want to share learning opportunities with students. Mark, thanks for the ways that you ignite support in the charitable sector. And Jennifer, thank you for your partnership. To all of you at the Walrus.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I have to share this. When I first met Jennifer, gosh, oh my gosh, it was, yeah, close to 30 years ago. And you were probably a student or recently graduated. And it's been incredible to watch Taking It Global truly use IT, use technology to make education more accessible across the country and around the world. And thank you all for sharing your stories tonight. I've learned so much and definitely identified some new connections and opportunity to strengthen education in this country and especially in the North. If you enjoyed this talks, we have more coming up on Tuesday, April 15th. You can join us online or in person at the Toronto Reference Library for the Walrus Talks Reimagining Volunteerism. This is presented by our friends at the Belonging Forum, and we're going to be exploring the power of service to counter and fight social isolation and civic polarization, which is on the rise. So keep an eye on your inbox. You're going to receive a follow-up email to this event. And if you'd like to stay in touch with the Walrus and attend future events, your best bet is to sign up for our free newsletter in that email. We also record these videos, so we will post that and you can watch it or share with anyone who wasn't able to join. Just check in at thewalrus.ca/events. You can watch all of our videos as part of the Walrus Talks video room. A bit more about the Walrus. We're a registered charity and our work is powered by people like you. So if you believe in this moment that Canada's in, that it calls for deep, rigorous, clear-eyed reporting, consider making a donation today. It's something that you can do to help ensure that Canada stays strong with free for all reporting. You can donate to the Walrus online at thewalrus.ca/support to ensure that we continue this work, which includes free events like this one. Thanks again to Taking It Global for your ongoing support. Thank you to our annual sponsors as well. That's Air Canada, Bullfrog Power, Inspire, RBC, Emerging Artists, and Rogers. And thank you all for being a part of this conversation this evening. We look forward to staying in touch. Have a good night.